بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Today inshallah, instead of a regular lesson, we'll do a reminder in relation to the current crisis that we're all witnessing both globally and locally, and that is the coronavirus. And this, inshallah, is just a reminder about our religion, how it deals with things like this. How are we supposed to deal with epidemics, sicknesses, and illnesses? What are the rules and regulations and Islamic guidelines and duties that are upon the community and individual? And so this is an important topic because it is occupying the mind of everyone. And so for those reasons, it is important for the Muslim, when the calamity strikes, that they view it from the eye of the religion. Means, how does Islam deal with these? What kind of guidelines and rules has it established for it? And this is all by way of a reminder, for some of this has already been said before. وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ ذِكْرَى تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Allah says, remind, for the reminder benefits the believers. So what we'll do, inshallah, we'll go from the beginning of talking about this issue from an Islamic point of view. So we'll begin first with some principles, some qawa'id, and then we'll end, inshallah, with some duties and responsibilities, awa'id, responsibilities upon us, what should we be doing. And by this, inshallah, we'll be able to benefit ourselves and our families, and also be in a state of the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, be able to obtain the pleasure of Allah. So we have to first begin, the coronavirus, COVID-19. We're hearing again and again about it, but we have to look at it from what it is Islamically. And the first thing I want to mention is that Islamically, there are different types of illnesses and sicknesses. So in Islam, we have something called a plague, ta'un, something called a plague. And in Arabic, it's called a ta'un. And then there is something called an epidemic illness, al-waba. And there's a difference between the two. And so we need to begin from there. Because if you look at the issue, you see that it's different. What we're dealing with now isn't the same as maybe the Black Plague or Black Death or Spanish flu or something like this. Is a different category. So the ulama, when they talk about this issue, the first thing they do is differentiate between a ta'un, a plague, and waba. Al-waba'u means an epidemic sickness or illness. So the ulama, they differ between these two. Are they the same thing or are they two different things? So the opinion that seems to be most correct from the ulama, or muhaqqiqun, the verifiers of knowledge, is that ta'un, a plague, is different than al-waba'. Al-waba'u is just an epidemic sickness that spreads, but the ta'un has specific categories or characteristics and rulings. Imam Ibn al-Qayyim, he says, rahimahullah, he died 751 Hijri, he says in Tib al-Nabawi, the prophetic medicine, that linguistically the ta'un is a plague. It's a type of sickness or disease. And in medical terms, the plague is a fatal vicious tumor that causes a very strong and painful infection and quickly turns the infected person into a black or green or brownish color. And so for those of us, when we look at the word ta'un or plague, we see that it affects the body a specific way. He says it creates vicious tumors and painful infection which turns the body or infected area black, green or brown. And afterwards, other harms start appearing. And then he continues by saying that the word epidemic, al-waba'u, is more general than a ta'un. So here the ulama showed that the plague is a specific type of illness, whereas an epidemic illness is not necessarily a plague, it's just any illness that spreads quickly. So then Ibn al-Qayyim continues to say that every plague is an epidemic, while not every epidemic is a plague. And that's what we have to remember, because it's going to help us to see that what we're dealing with now is not the same of what maybe the Sahaba dealt with in terms of the severity. وَكُلُّ طَاعُونٍ وَبَاءٌ وَلَيْسَ كُلُّ وَبَاءٍ طَاعُونًا. Every plague is an epidemic, but not every epidemic is a plague. And the reason why they're mentioning all this is because the ahadith that come about the plague have specific virtues and rules. Do they carry over to things like COVID-19 or to other types of illnesses? So Ibn al-Qayyim continues then, and he finishes by mentioning that the particular plague has symptoms, and you can read more in the prophetic medicine in English if you want, page 47 to 48. So here, Ibn al-Qayyim holds that view that there's a difference between the two, and this was sent before him by Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah. Imam al-Nawawi also, he said the same thing in his Sharh Sahih al-Muslim. He says, وَكُلُّ طَاعُونٍ وَبَاءٌ وَلَيْسَ كُلُّ وَبَاءٍ طَاعُونًا. Every plague can be considered an epidemic, but not every epidemic is a plague. Sharh Sahih Muslim, volume 14, page 370. And so Ibn Qayyim, Imam Nawawi, and also Imam Hafid ibn Hajar, rahimahullah, they all held the view that there's two different categories. And Ibn Hajar, when he mentions this as well, he brings proof to establish it. Because now some scholars say, well, actually do the same thing. Because any type of sickness that has spreads fast, that has a harmful effect, means it's lethal or fatal, it can be called a ta'un. And so we're going to come to the end of that. Can we call this COVID-19 a ta'un? Before we get there, why are the ulama differentiating between the two? One of the reasons we said is because of the effects. Physically, on the body, the ta'un is much more harmful than any other epidemic sickness. But Ibn Hajar brings a nice benefit to explain that the reason why they're different is that if you look in the lifetime of the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba, you see that they understood them to be two different things. For example, we know the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said a hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari that the plague will never enter Medina. The plague will never enter Medina. And this hadith is لا يدخل الطاعون ولا الدجال. لا يدخلها الطاعون ولا الدجال. The plague nor Dajjal will ever enter Medina. But in time of the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when they first arrived in Medina, it was a sickly land. And many of us we don't know this, but when they came to Medina from Mecca, it was full of sicknesses. Aisha describes in Sahih Bukhari, وَقَدِمْنَا الْمَدِينَ وَهِيَ أَوْبَأُ الْأَرْضِ اللَّهِ. When we arrived in Medina, it was the most sickly and healthy place. So here Ibn Hajar says, how can it be that we say that it's sickly unless the ta'un is not a wabah? It's a good fa'idah, right? Good evidence. So this hadith shows us that when they arrived in Medina, it was full of sicknesses. And Abu Bakr and Abu Bilal both got sick, radiallahu anhuma, and then they were cured. So they take from this that there is a difference between the two, and this is the evidence he uses. So if this is the case, that a plague is not an epidemic illness, then what we're dealing with today with coronavirus, is it a plague or is it an epidemic illness? And again, before we get to that answer, we need to take a look, are any scholars arguing that they're interchangeable, the same things? So some of our contemporary scholars held the view that it's the same thing. That even though a ta'un is much more lethal than any epidemic illness, you can call them both the same. For example, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen held that view. So Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, he writes in Sharh Riyadh al-Salihin, volume 6, page 69, that it was said that a plague is a name for every general epidemic illness that spreads quickly, like cholera, and other than it. And this is closer to the truth, for verily if it does not enter into the wording, then it enters into the meaning. So Shaykh Uthaymeen held the view that even though technically speaking, a plague is not like other illnesses, if it doesn't enter into love, it enters into the ma'na. So therefore he says that every epidemic that spreads, you can call it ta'un. So based on this then, is coronavirus considered a plague? Some of our contemporary scholars say yes. It takes the same ruling. For example, Shaykh Sulaymaan al-Ruhaili, Hafidhullah, he said this, that it is considered fixed the rulings of the plague because it's both lethal and the doctors of heard don't have any solution for it. So you can find that audio available on the internet. So from the first, the reason why we're dividing between the terms is that we can understand what's going on. And the ulama, they always do this. They look at the definitions and they make sure that what we're dealing with is to do with the reality. So the summary of this is that even though a ta'un, a plague, is different than the epidemic illnesses, an awbiya, we can conclude that this permanent coronavirus takes the same ruling as a plague, and therefore whatever extends from that ruling carries over to this. It's clear? And so this is the first thing that we wanted to mention, because this will come handy later on when we talk about precautions. The second thing I want to mention are principles, is that we have to know everything comes by the decree of Allah. Sometimes when we look at this illness and what's happening in the news, we forget that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is controlling, and this is from His qada and qadr. As Allah says, وَكَانَ أَمْرُ اللَّهِ قَدَرًا مَقْدُورًا. And the verity, the decree and the command of Allah is something determined. Surah Ahzab, ayah 38. And from this then, if something like coronavirus or any illness is spreading, the first thing we have to remember is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who decreed it, and it will only occur to you and affect you if Allah wills. It isn't something it's working on its own. And even though if you look at the media scare, it doesn't seem that people are putting it in that perspective. It seems to be acting on its own, affecting anyone, and people are forgetting Allah is the one in control. So if someone takes the precautions to protect themselves, this is shar'iyyan, this is mashru', legislated. But we also have to put in the beginning of that, it's Allah who decrees it. Allah who decides who will get ill and who will not. So even if you take all the precautions, you still may get ill. And if you do nothing, you may not get ill. But that doesn't mean Islamically you're supposed to just leave yourself to get ill. Allah says, قُلْ لَنْ يُصِيبَنَا إِلَّا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَنَا هُوَ مَوْلَانَا وَعَلَى اللَّهِ فَلْيَتَوَكَّلِ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Say, nothing shall ever happen to us except what Allah has ordained for us. He is our Mawla, our helper and protector, and Allah that the believers put their trust. So we have to remember this ayah, because when we hear about it, we have to also have full conviction. Allah is the one who is in control. يُدَبِّرُ الْأَمْرَ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ. Allah is the mudabbir, the controller of the administrator, and the one who is in control of the universe. With that, the third thing I want to mention, our principles, has to do with the fact, what is the sabab, the cause for these illnesses? So now when we look at it, we can look at the causes from the physical side, which is that it was caused in a particular location for a particular reason. And we look at it from an Islamic perspective, a religious perspective, which is plagues, sicknesses, including this coronavirus, are caused by the sins that human beings commit. And this is important because this is not something you're going to find in the newspapers and the medical reports and the media. They're not going to say it's because we're sinful. They're going to look at it from a material perspective. But we have to also look at it from the religious perspective, which is that these illnesses, what causes them to spread out in particular time periods versus others. And here we're bringing the hadith to show us that in the ta'un specifically, since the coronavirus can carry the same, is due to the illnesses, sins of mankind. It's the hadith of Abdullah ibn Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma, where he said the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam came upon us one day, and he said, Ya ma'ashar al-muhajirin, khamsun إِذَا ابْتُلِيتُمْ بِهِنَّ وَأَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ أَن تُدْرِكُهُنَّ. O ma'ashar and the muhajirun, O gathering and group of the muhajirun, 5 things, which if you are tested by, and I seek refuge in Allah that you won't be tested by or live to see them. And then the Rasulullah listed all 5, and I want to mention the first one. He says, لَمْ تَظْهَرِ الْفَاحِشَةِ في قوم قط حتى يعننوا بها إلا فشى فيهم الطاعون والأوجاع التي لم تكن مضت في أسلافهم الذي مضوا. That there never is immorality, never appears amongst the people prevalent and open, except Allah will spread the plague and sicknesses amongst them which their forefathers or predecessors never knew before that. This hadith Ibn Majah Sahih according to Imam al-Albani. So from this hadith, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam linked between the ta'un, the plague, and the sins. That the fawahish, when they become apparent, then this will occur. A fawahish can include all types of major sins, but more specifically the zina and like this. Hafiz ibn Hajar commenting in Fath al-Bari says, from these ahadith is clear, the plague is a punishment for the disobedience of Allah. And this is a general theme in Islam. Whenever we do sins, Allah will test us. Allah will send a calamity. ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس. Allah says that corruption and evil has occurred on the land and the sea due to what people have earned with their hands. لِيُذِيقَهُمْ بَعْدَ الَّذِي عَمِلُوا لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ. And the intent behind it is that Allah, He allows us to witness these so that we may return back to Him. يَرْجِعُونَ means make tawbah ila Allah. So here we need to be honest and very clear that the sins that we're committing globally are causing these type of illnesses. And so if the coronavirus as an illness is what we're facing now, we need to all look internally. What dhunub, what sins are we committing? It's worsened, not just globally or blame a country over another. وَمَنْ لَمْ يَتُوبُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ. Allah said those who don't repent, those are the oppressive ones. So we need to look internally. It's every one of us who are committing sins, and we all can admit to that we do our share of wrong. But we need to repent to Allah, and we should take this opportunity to return back to Him. You see, when you see these calamities and people passing away, it should make you reflect about your own mortality. So perhaps you may die tomorrow, perhaps you may live for long, but you don't know what hal you're going to be in, so you have to return back to Allah now. And Allah talks about in the Quran people who He punished earlier, from generations, when the punishment came, it didn't affect them at all, in terms of repenting to Allah and drawing nearer to Him. وَلَقَدْ أَخَذْنَاهُمْ بِالْعَذَابِ فَمَا اسْتَكَانُوا لِرَبِّهِمْ وَمَا يَتَضَرَّعُونَ. Allah says, indeed we seized the punishment. We seized them, means a particular generation before us with punishment, but they humbled themselves not to their Lord, nor did they invoke Him with submission. SubhanAllah, means that the punishment came to them, nothing, no effect, no tawbah, no ruju' ila Allah. And we shouldn't be like that. When we hear of the case of the world that we're sitting in our houses, quarantined, thinking that's enough. It's not enough. You have to make tawbah to Allah. Perhaps you can pass away. And even if you didn't, this is the opportunity to make tawbah to Allah, because this is happening to remind us we're doing wrong. So important, when we look at that ayah in Surah Al-Mu'minun, ayah 76, فَمَسْتَكَانُوا لِرَبِّهِمْ. They didn't become more humble to Allah, nor did they invoke Him, ask Him, beg Him. And we'll talk about the end, certain illnesses and ta'un in the past and how the people reacted to it. So we can get an understanding. When things become tough, we become nearer to Allah. So very important, the third principle, which is that it's due to our sickness, our sins. However, that doesn't mean that the illness itself is always a punishment for the believers. Because it comes from the sins, how then can we understand that people who are righteous and do good, how does it affect them? Maybe they're sinning less. So the ulama, they actually discuss this, and it's important. There's a hadith that talks about that a ta'un, a plague, or an epidemic, is also a rahmah, a mercy for this ummah. Hadith Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha fil Bukhari, the Rasul sallallahu said, أَنَّهُ عَذَابٌ يَبْعَثُهُ اللَّهُ عَلَى مَنْ يَشَاءُ. That this plague, or plagues, they are punishments. Allah, He sends whomsoever He wills, whomsoever He wills of His people, of His creation. وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ جَعَلَهُ رَحْمَةً لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And it's also a mercy for the believers. لَيْسَ مِنْ أَحَدٍ. Then He says, nobody remains in a place where there's ta'un, فَيَمْكُثُ فِي بَلَدِهِ صَابِرًا مُحْتَسِبًا. Patient and seeking Allah's reward, except that if whatever occurs to him, means that person gets afflicted by the sickness, إِلَّا كَانَ لَهُ مِثْلُ أَجْرِ شَهِيد. Then he takes a reward and earns the reward of a shaheed, a martyr. So this hadith Bukhari becomes now interesting. That we said its origin of these sicknesses are sins. So how can it be rahmah then? Because the ulama, they discuss how can it be mercy on one hand, but it's derived from sins. Another hadith also shows, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, and it clarifies why it's a rahmah for us versus others. Because it says in the beginning, عَذَابٌ يَبْعَثُهُ اللَّهُ عَلَى مَنْ يَشَاءُ. So who are those people? Hadith Muslim Ahmed comes, فَالطَّاعُونَ الشَّهَادَةٌ لِأُمَّتِي وَرَحْمَةٌ لَهُمْ وَالرِّجْسٌ عَلَى الْكَافِرِينَ. So that's sarih now, clear. That the rahmah is for the ummah, a plague is a mercy for this ummah, and martyrdom for them, and a punishment for the disbelievers. Musnad, Imam Ahmed brings in, Shaykh Muqbil authenticating Sahih al-Musnad. But now, when looking at the two sources, Hafiz Hajar actually investigates, and he says, this hadith clearly shows the ta'un, the plagues, al-rahmah, إِنَّمَا هُوَ خَاصٌ لِلْمُسْلِمِينَ. It's only specific for the Muslims as a mercy. As for disbelievers, then, it would be a punishment in the dunya qabl akhirah. And with that, then, the ulama talk about the shahada, the person who is afflicted and passes away due to this, they die as shaheed. And we'll talk about later on, how can they die as shaheed if it's caused by sins. Right? So we'll talk about then how you can clarify the point that even though it's caused by sins, it doesn't even negate that it's also a mercy. But we take a benefit that, as a Muslim, we should be cautious of these things and return back to Allah. We should not be heedless and taking only the material means. For we see now in the media, everyone's running to the grocery stores and taking the material means, preparing themselves. How about then the religious ones? So we need to be cautious of Allah and also aware of Him and repent to Allah. That's from the means. With that, it's also important to pay attention to the historical angle, which is that plagues in Islamic history. Because when you learn about history, you also get the sense of perspective. Now people are behaving as if we didn't see in the last 10 years a lot of other diseases or illnesses. And this shows you again that every time we forget the history or our past, we tend to behave or we tend to go farther away from the reality. So it's always important to take a benefit from the tariq. Islamically, the ulama mentioned that the plague actually affected the Sahaba and Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And so prior to that, we said that at the time in Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam there was no plague. But in Medina there was a waba, an epidemic. And that's before he came, when he was coming from Mecca to Medina. So he made dua for Medina and Medina cleared. Right, of all these illnesses. And he also asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect it from the ta'un. And that's how you don't find that in Medina historically. So then another hadith, Rasulullah actually predicted the plague that happened at the time of the Khilafah of Umar bin Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu is called the ta'un of al-Amwas. And this ta'un, this ta'un itself occurred in the year 638 or 639, which is about 7 years after Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the historians, they say it's 18th year Hijri. And Umar was the Khilafah, the Khalifa at the time. Now, when you look at this illness, the ulama, they mentioned the Amwas, it happened, and the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually told them of it coming. And this is important because that's one of the signs of the hour. Hadith in Bukhari, the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he told them during the Ghazwa of Tabuk, count 6 things before the occurrence of the hour. And from those he says, ثُمَّ مَوْتَانٌ يَأْخُذُ فِيكُمْ كَالْعُقَاصِ الْغَنَمِ. That there's going to be a plague that will kill a lot of you, the same way if a plague affects the sheep. Means when the sheep get a sickness, because they're all together, one by one they start getting ill. So he used the example of sheep. Multiple sheep get ill and they start passing away like this. People will be dying one after another. Here the ulama say this was actually the ta'un that happened in time of Khilafah of Umar, and ta'un Amwas. And it happened, we said, and the ulama, they mentioned in Hafid al-Hajr, this is one of the signs of the hour. The Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam spoke about directly. Then he said, وَكَانَ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ فَتْحْ بَيْتِ الْمَقْدِسِ, that Jerusalem will be conquered, and it happened as the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. When the 6 he counted was after this, well, take over Jerusalem. And it happened in the Khilafah Umar. In this ta'un, the Sahaba faced, a lot of them passed away. And we have to take this as an example because in here, many benefits came. Many benefits came about how the Sahaba dealt with it, but also the rules and regulations. So how many Sahaba passed away? 25,000. Okay, we have to pay attention. When we look at today's coronavirus versus what we see in the past, and we'll mention others' numbers as well, this is a tremendous difference. 25,000 Sahaba, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. From those are the notable Sahaba, Mu'adh bin Jabal, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah, Yazid bin Abi Sufyan, Shurayh bin Hasana, Sahab bin Umar, his father, Fadl bin Abbas, and many. So these are the leaders of Sahaba. And Abu Ubaidah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu was the top 10 from Asham Bashirin. And so the ulama mentioned that a group of the amongst the Sahaba passed away, and it happened all in Sham. For this ta'un happened in the area, we said this is a region referred to as an Amwas, which is in Palestine. So 25,000. Ibn Kathir and Yaqut Hamwi, Mu'jam Rudan say 25,000 Sahaba passed away. 25,000. And so with this, the Sahaba lived through it and they witnessed it, and they dealt with the way the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam taught them. So the Sahaba in Islam, we have a predecessor in relation to these illnesses. In fact, many of the ulama mentioned that our ummah, we have, if you look at history, a lot of these things. Because for our ummah we said rahmah. This ummah is ummah Allah made marhumah. In hadi ummah marhumah. Our ummah is a merciful ummah. Allah made it one who has mercy. And Allah has given mercy. Which then the ulama say that in our history, lots of these things happen. Killings and plagues, etc. And from that mercy is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishes us in the dunya qabl akhirah. So if we look at the plague of Amwas, 25,000. And it's not only there. If we look in the tariq, we find other examples. And a lot of them happen in Sham, and some happen globally, and some in a particular region. So for example, another one, it happened in the year 841 Hijri. There was a plague in Sham area, and it plagued the land of Halb, or Harab, and Hama. Both of these regions, they had a lot of killings. The numbers, for example, 300 people died daily, and at one point 150 daily. And when we look at these numbers versus what we see today, we tend to again become more mature about what's happening. Of course, the coronavirus may increase. We ask Allah to protect us from it. But when we look at these numbers, also gives a sense, a perspective. 300 people daily. And we'll mention later on another incident which is even more, or just as upsetting or worrying. But with all of this, the Sahaba and the Salaf, they dealt with this the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wished for them, by coming towards Him. So if you go to the Mawsu'a Tarikhiyya, they mention these numbers. Now, why is a lot of plagues happening in the Sham region? This is interesting because both of them mentioned now are in Sham. There's actually a hadith, it's very interesting. One day, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said, أتاني جبريل عليه السلام بالحمى والطاعون. One day, بالحمى والطاعون. One day, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam came to me with headaches, and he came with and flu, and he came with me to me with the plague. So he asked me about these two. Where should I put them? And he says, فأمسكت. So I kept the headaches and the flu and stuff in Medina and the fever. وأرسلت طاعون إلى الشام. And I asked Jibreel to put the ta'un in Sham. And so we look at this hadith compared to what we see earlier. We see it adds up, but it doesn't mean that it's exclusive to that region. But if you look in Tariq, we see a lot of times Sham is always hit by something like this. It's because of these ahadith, and this hadith sahih fi Sahih Musnad of Imam al-Wadi'i. As for Medina, we said Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam protected, asked Allah to protect it, and that's why historically, and up until now, there has not been any case of ta'un in Medina. There's even some academic papers, one historian and researcher he gathered from all the times, and he found no cases of a plague ever in Medina. It's not far-fetched. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is not speaking from his own self. مَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. So when we look at these, it's amazing. Because we don't always see this to be one of the miracles and one of the signposts of Islam. With that being said, the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, understanding that the Ummah will go through these things, he said, Al-mat'oonu shahidun. Whoever dies with a plague is a shaheed, a martyr. And so this is a glad tidings for the person who is affected by these illnesses, which then by extension, coronavirus, COVID-19, because we said it's ta'oon. Whoever dies from it, shaheedun, inshaAllah. And this gives you then alleviation. Because what is worrying the people? People are worried about the death. And even though it's inevitable, wherever you go, you may die, wherever you may be, whatever you may do. But when you take this hadith, you look at it and you say, inshallah, there's khair. If you get afflicted or you're cured, that's khair. And if you get protected from it generally, it's khair. And if you die from it, it's khair. All khair. But today in our society, when there's no deen and iman, all you're worrying about is your hayat. And this is what's problematic now in the Muslims. We don't look at it from a far perspective. How many people pass? But we also think about, for the Muslims, it could be khair. Much khair, because the Rasul called him shaheed. Now how can they be a shaheed, as we said earlier, because it came from the sins? How can a shaheed be one who, the cause of his shahada was sins? Ibn Hajar brings this, and he mentions that the ta'oon, it's a aqooba bisabab al-ma'siyah. It's a punishment that occurred due to disobedience. So how can we combine between the two? He says in reality, the way we look at it is that the person who is affected by this and affected by it, in reality he reached the status of a shaheed. But the person who is a disobedient one, because it's important, there's different levels of the believer and the ma'asi. So as for the one who is generally obedient, inshallah he's shaheed, there's no doubt about it. But it's the one who was not a complete believer, or who had some types of sin, that he will get the daraja of the shahada, and he will obtain it. However, his daraja will not be equivalent to the one who was sinful amongst the Muslims, died from it. So he will still get some reward, but won't be equivalent. So it could be said that the shahada is one who is obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and dies from it. And for those reasons, you see that Mu'adh bin Jabal prayed to Allah that Allah him to be affected by the rahmah, the ta'oon. And this actually comes in Sahih at-Targhib of Shaykh Al-Albani authentically. Number 1402, the Mu'adh bin Jabal asked Allah for it and he died a shaheed. So it's very interesting how he looked at it from the side of rahmah. He asked Allah to allow the Mu'adh to be affected by the rahmah, and he passed away in that ta'oon. And of course, his understanding was this. But again, this doesn't mean that a Muslim should ask Allah to pass them away in this. But we don't know if we are obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nor are we supposed to be taking means. Because the ulama say that also, when you look at the other narrations, it's like meeting the enemy. You don't wish to do it, you take the precautions, but when it happens, you're firm. And then Ibn Hajar continues and he mentions that it could also be the reason why that they reach the status of shahada, even though they're not as obedient, or this issue came from sins, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will still reward them for what they went through. And also, maybe it could be a punishment on one angle for the one who's disobedient, or as a compensation because they didn't order the good and prohibit the evil. So there's different ways to look at it. How can somebody be affected by this? But he says the one who's asi, disobedient from the ummah, then in reality he says what seems to be correct is that the one who's disobedient, who's committing sins, then in reality this person, even though the hadith mentioned that whoever dies is going to be in a state of shahada, then it seems to be more so for the one who's obedient. But we cannot say it's specific for the one who is a believer completely. Still they will get a reward. So this shows you again that there is no contradiction between the two. But the one who is obedient to Allah and is afflicted by it, then inshallah more so that they're shaheed, there is no doubt in relation to this. So we need to pay attention that even if someone were to be afflicted by this, then he doesn't want to die and they're not going to get this darajah because they're more sinful. So by making tawbah to Allah in this time, it will protect you from many things. Firstly, it will help you return back to Allah the way you're supposed to. And if something were to happen to you, inshallah, you'll still get the shahada. See, the fa'idah then of tawbah is so important. Also, we need to then take a look at the responsibilities now. What do we do? So now that we understand these things, what is our responsibility, communal and individual? First, we should be making dua and adhkar. We need to return back to Allah. We mentioned tawbah, that's one of them. Do your daily adhkar, sabahan and masa'an, evening and morning. You should also be busy asking Allah to take away this coronavirus from the community and from the world. Imam Bukhari has a chapter, Bab ad-du'a'i bi raf'i al-waba'i wal-waj'. Asking Allah and supplicating to Him to remove the epidemic illnesses and sicknesses. And then he brings the same hadith, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he arrived in Medina, he made dua for it. When he saw it was full of illnesses. So number one, dua. And this is important because now you may see in our conversations people are just saying different things. Some of them are complaining, some people are worried, but you make dua. Ask Allah to protect you and others. And from those dua we can make from the morning adhkar, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, whoever says in the morning 3 times, Bismillahi alladhi la yadurru ma'a ismihi shay'un fil ardi wa la fis sama'i wa huwa as-sami'ul 'alim, nothing will afflict him in that morning, and if he does also in the evening the same. Hadith Sunan Dawood, Hadith Sahih. This is a short dua we should memorize. Bismillahi alladhi la yadurru ma'a ismihi shay'un fil ardi wa la fis sama'i wa huwa as-sami'ul 'alim. 3 times. And so from here we take the benefit that if someone were to do this, then inshallah they will be protected. And this is the words of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So that's amongst the dua you can make. Another dua you can make in your adhkar when you're leaving the house. In general, Mu'awwadatayn, Ayatul Kursi, increase in this. So this is so important because this is what Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam did himself. He did himself when he arrived in Medina, made dua. The second one, which many of us are familiar with, is the quarantine and self-isolation. And this one is what the ulama discuss, and we have a hadith for it. And before getting there, we have to know the term quarantine itself. It just means to keep yourself away. Originally comes from a French-Italian word, means 40 days. And what is intended by the quarantine is someone separating themselves, and they themselves are not yet sick or have the illness and symptoms, but they're keeping away to protect themselves. Versus that which they say is isolation, is the one who already got afflicted and is isolating themselves. So this is important. Someone is worried about the illness, the coronavirus coming to them, and they're high risk, or they are already affected by it with the symptoms, that they have to stay away. And this is based on the prophetic narration of Umar. The same time, the Ta'un, Amwas, when it happened, Umar was arriving to Sham, and Abu Ubaidah wrote to him that there's an illness in this land. And so Umar, he consulted the Sahaba. And the ulama says it's proof that when something, calamities like this happen, you consult the people of knowledge and status. And he asked them, and they said, anyone knows a hadith, and they narrated in the hadith, قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا سمعتم به بأرض فلا تقدموا عليه وإذا وقع بأرض وأنتم بها فلا تخرجوا فرارا منه. That if you hear of the plague or epidemic in a land, don't enter it. And if you're in that land and it occurred, do not leave from it, fleeing that plague. And so here we take the ruling of the quarantine. And I want to mention a benefit. This idea of quarantine is Islamic. It comes from our religions, from the foundations of our deen, that it teaches us to protect the life. We know from Durrat, the 5 basic things Islam has come to protect. This is the hifd of the nafs, protecting and preserving life. So from this we see Islam has come with this idea of quarantine. Well before the Western world practiced it. In fact, you will see historically that this concept of quarantine is found in religious books. The oldest being the Torah, the Old Testament, and secondly then Islam. In the Western world, later on, they started doing this practice of quarantine. So Islam with 4 runners. Until Shaykh Al-Albani mentions one of his fatwa, it's actually mu'jiza from the mu'jizatul nabawiyyah. It's from the prophetic miracles. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam spoke about the idea of quarantining yourself in a land. So every time we hear quarantine, we should know min ad-din. And it's from our religion because we have a clear nas about it. And historically, you can Google them, you can see. In the Western world, the first concept of quarantine happened in the year 1377. This is the first with the time when they did it during the Black Death of the Black Death plague. So here, this hadith teaches you if you're in a land and this sickness is in, you don't leave, and if you're not there, you don't enter. So what we see today internationally, what's happening, is from the deen. Along with that, in the hadith of Abu Hurairah, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, لا يورد الممرض على الصح. The one who is sick should not mix with those who are healthy. So if someone has symptoms, the coronavirus and the likes, should not come to the masajid, should not come to the housing, should keep himself quarantined. Min ad-din. It's not a Western intervention or preventative measure. Min ad-din. And so here we take this benefit that the quarantine concept Islamically is there. And the ulama, they say that when you look at it, this is something which you can say is difficult. How do you ensure people are going to be quarantined? So that's why historically they talk about voluntary versus involuntary practice of quarantine. These ahadith are talking about voluntarily. It's not forcing. The government's not forcing anyone. So the ulama discuss how did the people not go out then? Because they saw the reward of staying. What did he say, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if you die in this, you're a shaheed. So therefore, Ibn Hajar quotes Ibn Abdul Barr saying, I've never heard of any scholar who ran away from the plague. I've never heard of any scholar who was land, he came, he never left. And the ulama were role models. Why? Because they saw the reward and they stayed. That's how it used to be done. Because now you may see that without interventions, everyone's running away. So how are they going to catch the ulama? They are role models. They stand firm. So we take a benefit from this. And why? Because there is a minority opinion that you could flee from it. But that's not a correct view. As we see that the majority of ulama said no. Now this also teaches us a benefit, which is if somebody is in that land where there is a coronavirus or the plague or epidemic, they can leave if it's not running away from the sickness. For example, some may have work, they have to go somewhere. Are they allowed to go there? Because you say, now it's coronavirus, I can't go anywhere. And some people are scared to even go because nobody's going anywhere. So Islamically they can, if it's not running from the coronavirus or any illness or plague. Imam Nawawi says in Sharh Sahih Muslim, وَاتَّفَقُوا, the ulama have agreed, على جواز خروج بشغل وغرض غير فرار. It is permissible, the scholars agreed, to leave for work to a land which there is a ta'un, or for other purposes other than fleeing. ودليل الصريح الحديث. The hadith is clear. فلا تخرجوا منها فرارا منه. The hadith says clearly, running from it. If you're going there, for example, someone got ill, and then they're going to go from that land which is ill to another land to get medical treatment. It's permissible? It's permissible. It is. Because in that case they have to go or work or whatever. But nowadays people are in cargo industry or even the airline industry. They're going one land to another land. Everywhere there's corona. So they can still go as long as not fleeing from it. So Islamically this is the way it's dealt with. And we should also pay attention to the idea of quarantining and self-isolation is min ad-deen. So if someone has the symptoms, you should not tell themselves it's okay. No, they have to stay away from the masajid even. And we'll get to that later on. And even from the gatherings. And this is from Islam. It's not just from the medical community. Third one is the issue of shaking hands. For many people now are asking, can we shake the hands with someone who has illnesses or if I'm afraid? So the ulama in general, the fuqaha, when they talk about these things, they talk about it from the angle of contagious diseases. And they say that in general, some of the Shafi'i scholars, like Al-Bayjuri, died 1277, and other than him, they say that it's disliked to shake the hands with a person with a contagious disease. And then they mention examples like leprosy or the likes. So the ulama, some of them mention that when it comes to shaking hands, makruh, and some wording they say tahrim, haram, to shake the hands with one who has a contagious disease. And so they mention this in their books, the Mawsu'a Fiqhiyya, Mawsu'at Al-Fiqhiyya, Kuwaitiyya also mentions this. And they say that this is from the ways of protecting yourself. Now what if someone has symptoms of coronavirus then? Should they be shaking the people's hands? No, it's not Islamic. Because of this point. Because again, it's also not ma'qul to be shaking the hands of everybody and spreading it. Now what if someone is going to not shake their hands out of fear? Because for example, I don't know who has it. And we don't know, then they give salam still. But if someone wants to shake their hands, it's still permissible. It's only when someone has something clear. That's what we see today, people, they tapping their feet and the elbows. ما عندنا دليل. We don't have any delay for that. So it's best to avoid that which we don't know. And you could just give salam. But giving the salam with the hand is also from the deen. But say salam is sufficient if someone is afraid or they feel that there may be a risk. And so here we take a benefit that Islam comes with these measures. So important to see that we have these in our books. The fourth one is the issue regarding the congregational prayer and the Friday prayer, especially Friday prayer. For yesterday, a lot of confusion. So first thing we should know, the ulama, they mention in the books of fiqh and hadith that if someone has a contagious illness, and they usually mention the issue of leprosy and the likes, because these illnesses were common at that time as being contagious. And leukoderma as well, spreading to people. So they mentioned that if you look at the hadith, hadith Muslim, hadith Abu Hurairah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من أكل من هذه الشجرة فلا يقربن مسجدنا ولا يؤذين بريح الثوم. Whoever eats this plant, means the garlic, should not approach our masajid, nor should it harm us with his odor. This hadith, the ulama use as qiyas, as measure, an analogy, because it's haram to harm people by scent. They said, min bab al-awla, more deservedly, someone who has a contagious disease cannot come to the masajid and the Jum'ah prayer. An example, Hafiz ibn Abdul Barr, died 463 Hijri, in his Kitab al-Tamheed, volume 3, page 196, he says, when he mentions this hadith by analogy, then he mentions many examples, and he says, or one who has a disease that may harm others, such as leprosy and the like, anything that causes annoyance to the people, if it's present in one of the neighbors or the people who was praying in the masajid, then it's permissible to expel them from the masajid and keep them away. Then they have a right to do this until this reason is no longer present. And once that reason is no longer present, then he has the right to come to the masjid. So from here we take what the ulama are saying, that the person who has the symptoms do not come to the masajid, do not come to the Jum'ah prayer, and do not come to the gathering, rather they quarantine themselves to cure themselves. So important, because this is from Islam and the signs are up all across the masajid. So someone who is practicing the deen should take it seriously. Shouldn't be, oh, it's okay, it's just, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect. No, these are means. And also we find that if that, for those reasons, someone, like yesterday, the Jum'ah prayer, many people were asking, can we pray the Jum'ah or not? And from there, the ulama, they say that the Jum'ah prayers, so we saw as a post was shared amongst other brothers and the sisters, the kibar ulama, the senior scholars advised that the prayer for Jum'ah be established. However, they mention specifically the council of senior scholars, Hayya kibar ulama, they say if anyone's afraid to get infected or harm others, it is permitted not to attend the Friday prayers. So if you feel you're at risk or you have symptoms, you stay back. But the Jum'ah will still be done as long as the government has not banned this. And this is important because if the government officials, for example, say that no one should come out because the case is severe, then this is different than when they say that there is an issue, people can still pray but lower the numbers. So here we take a benefit. Some masajid choose not to pray. But the kibar ulama, the advice they're giving us is that it still be established, but if you have symptoms or afraid, you don't have to come. So it's so important because in these situations, the fifth point is important. We need to go back to the right sources. That's the fifth point. Take your ilm and your advice from the right sources and officials. It's not correct just to ask everyone. وَإِذَا جَاءَهُمْ أَمْرٌ مِّنْ أَمْرِ أَوِ الْخَوْفِ أَذَاعُوا بِهِ. Look what Allah says. When the affairs come to them, in terms of fear and safety, they go and they're spreading these things around. وَلَوْ رَدُّوهُ إِلَى الرَّسُولِ وَلَا أُولِي الْأَمْرِ مِنْهُمْ لَعَلِمَهُ الَّذِينَ يَسْتَنبِطُونَهُ مِنْهُمْ. That if they were just returning back to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, those officials, ulul amr, the rulers, the people of knowledge, they would have derived for them the correct ruling in relation to it. So here the ulama stressed that the issues regarding this illness and the rules and regulations, if it has to do with the medical, it must come from the official body, the medical community in our country. If it comes to the issue of deen, go to ulama. Today we have everybody just posting their own opinion and 2 cents and confusing people. And this is dangerous because in these issues, what Allah say, when safety and fear, you have to go to the kibar ulama. It's not something you just go to anyone. When Umar had the issue regarding ta'un amwas, what did he do? He gathered the Sahaba, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, big ulama and Sahaba, they were talking about it. And here Ibn Hajj says the benefit to take the mashwara, the suggestions from those who are noble and knowledgeable. Not now, we just go on the internet, now everybody is scaring one another, sharing sometimes even fake news, which is unacceptable because now you're creating more fear. So Muslims have to be diligent because today the problem we have, social media became a marja. You want to know what's happening, you go to social media. You want an answer, and social media, where does it get it from? Anyone's asking, it's not correct. Because fear and safety is very serious affairs. So very important Muslim, if the ulama say this, then we stick with it because again, we're obliged to obey their opinions when it's based on these issues. Now the 6th point is that what if the precautions, or what precautions should we be taking? And the ulama say that you should take all the precautions. So washing our hands, or hand sanitizers, or vaccination, or whatever, if there is vaccination to come in the future, all of these means are permissible. Taking the preventative measure is from Islam. And so for those reasons we see in the Haramain Sharifain, we see that they're taking extra precautions to ensure that the Musallin are safe. And this is from Islam. And likewise in our houses and masajid we should do the same. Cleaning more, encourages people to clean their hands more, to clean their carpet. For example, it's mentioned in the haram, they're washing the carpet 10 times a day, one before salah, after salah, and at night they also clean the haram again. So this is from the deen. These are great honorable things because Islam has come with the cleanliness. So also we take the means at home too, washing our hands, teaching the children the same, the masajid, cleaning it, do extra measures. And here Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen in Sharh Riyadh Salihin mentions a nice benefit. He says then, after he mentions that it's permissible to leave a land where there's a plague if there is a need, he says then also, in terms of the cure, or medicines, or pills, or even when it comes to the ibr, the needles, or there's vaccinations for waba, then in this case is min al-biqaya, you can take it qabl nazal, if before it occurs. In general, means not in this case, because in this case we don't have any vaccination, but if there was a particular illness, you can take these before. And then he says, there's also no harm if it does occur, a waba, an epidemic, and the cure is there, that somebody takes it, because all of this is from curing themselves. Sharh Ya Salihin, volume 6, page 72. So if they were to find the coronavirus vaccination and it's safe, we take it. No harm in that. And all the other measures too, washing the hands and the dua and everything else we just mentioned. So the Muslim must take precaution. We should not be lackadaisical in this issue or to be negligent, because we may find in the community especially more than the individual, the community has a responsibility. So for example, in the masajid, they have to do more effort because they're the ones who are opening the doors to the community, and that's their responsibility, and Allah will reward them for all the efforts that they do. With this, if the government were to oppose or to make a ban, for example, of all public prayers, or they tell the citizens not to come to the masajid, then what should we do in those regard? Some countries now, they're getting a certain notices from the government, 200 people or less, or 1,000 people or less, or 250 and less. And soon we come to a point no one can go. So Sheikh Sa'ad al-Shithri, may Allah preserve him, was asked from the questioner from France. He said, many masajid now have decided to stop their Friday prayer due to the government preventing the gatherings of more than 1,000 people in one place. And the question is, the objective of preserving life in the Sharia, when the fundamentals is to preserve life, does this take precedence over the religious obligations, such as a sign from the signs of Islam, means congregational prayer? So in Islam, we have the 5 things Islam came to protect. And from them is the deen. Hifadh al-nafs is one, and also another one is the deen. But he says here, when it comes to preserving the life, does it take precedence over establishing jama'ah? And is taking and agreeing with such decisions, is it considered from the maqasid of Sharia? And he says, as proceeded, established the congregational prayers is from the completion of the preservation of religion. It is a desired affair from the legislation which comes from the religious texts. However, if it leads to the loss of one of the 5 fundamental objectives of the religion, then the fundamental objective of the religion is preserved, and it is given precedence over the action of completion. So in the case and situation where the government says no one go to the jama'ah because they want to save people's lives, then that ruling or decision based on this takes precedence over praying the jama'ah, which is also from the completion of these good deeds. So in those cases, when that ruling comes, then you listen to it. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu ati'u Allah wa ati'u Rasulahu wa al-amri minkum. O you who believe, obey Allah and His Messenger and those rules who have authority over you. And then the Shaykh continued, but as far as a city has not said that, as long as a city has not said in relation to this epidemic, means the COVID-19, if they have not said anything regarding this, then the people are still to pray the Jum'ah and to establish it. And if they made a particular number, he says, then you can separate the people. For example, 50 and 100 people pray in this place, and 50 or 100 people pray in that place. And if not many people will become, then it's also fine. And it says that this is in order so that people can learn and the information can reach the people, and also so that the masajid cannot be a place from which the epidemic is spreading, because that's not also from the deen, that everyone comes together and we all make each other sick. And then he mentions at the end that the Sahabi Amr bin As, may Allah be pleased with him, he advised during the plague in Sham, means the plague in the time of Umar, that the people separate from one another, means that they prayed in groups versus all together. And this is audio you can find on the internet. The Shaykh recently mentioned this fatwa. As for the narration of Amr ibn As is reported in the Muslim Imam Ahmad, where he mentioned, أيها الناس إن هذا الوجع إذا وقع فإنما يشتغل اشتغال النار. And in reality, the narration is a weak narration according to some scholars. But nonetheless, the ulama still take it that if there is a situation where they put a particular cap of how many people can pray in one place, then you separate. It's okay to pray with some here, some there, some there. And if whoever, again, is feeling that they are going to get sick because they have a weak immune system or older or whatever, they can stay back altogether. So again, this is the advice of the ulama. Also, we want to mention that what if the government then also said everything shut down? Then the government has the right to do that. Islamically, if an Islamic government or any government decides to take the protection of their communities or the citizens to the point they want to shut down the city, as you see some European countries and others that have done this, then this is something which they can do. Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, he mentions the example of the leper, right? Because this is very big in their time and time before. He said, if here the lepers have to stay away from the people and they must live in separate areas, isolated, and the ruler has to enforce isolation on them. And if the leper or the ruler refuses to do that, then they're sinful. So again, that was considered a contagious person at that time. So the government has that right. Ibn Qayyim, his student, said in Turuq al-Hukumiyya that the authority, the government has the obligation to prevent the leper with necessary needs. The authority has the obligation to provide the leper with necessary needs, shelter, food, and clothing, if he doesn't have enough to supply himself. So in the case of someone's quarantined in their place, and they have to be, then the government has to provide for them in order to be quarantined. And from this points and these mentions, we see that Islam has a comprehensive approach to these issues. And I want to finish by just mentioning an incident from the past in relation to one type of epidemic that happened in Islam and how the Muslims, they dealt with it. Because when we look at our situation, we have to be optimistic. Right? We shouldn't be spreading bad news to one another. Bashiru without enough furu. Give people glad tidings. Be optimistic, make dua. But now we have some people, they may be telling people the Qiyamah is coming or something like this, forgetting that there are 10 major signs of the hour. We're missing all the basics. Until one of the fatawa, even the Ashir al-Muhsin Abbad, surprisingly, someone asked, is Malak al-Maut now changed his name to coronavirus? Billah. And I was shocked to say, what kind of question is this? Who is thinking like this? But you see the craziness and the fear people are getting until they get to that level. So when we look at history, you also see, subhanAllah, the Muslims passed through this. And I want to mention something, because many ulama authors on this subject, Ibn Hajar, for example, Suyuti, and many others. It's mentioned by one of the ulama in the year, his name is Shihabuddin Ahmed bin Yahya bin Abi Hajra. He mentioned the year 449 Hijri, that there was a ta'un that covered the entire earth. And he says in this situation, it was nothing like it. People were getting sick. And he said even in Mecca it entered. And many people, they died in there. And he also then mentions that when this occurred, it was killing even the animals, the birds and the wuhush, the wild animals and the gazelles and the dogs and the cats. Even it was killing that which is considered from the property of the people, like the camels. And he says then, when this occurred, there was nowhere safe, but it was only known from those places which were safe was Medina Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Again, when we look at the hadith, 449 Hijri, the hadith Rasulullah said it's not going to enter, it didn't enter. And then he continues talking about how it got so bad, it entered Egypt even, and Cairo, and every day 20,000 people were dying. Some say 25,000, some say 27,000. And then he said, as we got to the point where it was so severe that the people were going out to the masajid and making dua. And he said they would fill the masajid as if it was Ramadan. And they would make dua and they were increasing qunut. Even he says Ahl al-Dhimma came out and the atfal. Even the kuffar, they came to make dua with them and the children. And then he said it was so bad they were burying daily. The imam would make janazah daily in the masajid. Sometimes more than 60 people at once. One salah. And he said the khatibs were doing qunut and the salawat and dua and it continued like this until he said at one moment people were in dire situation making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the same way they would do in Ramadan. And it says then it passed them a time where there was severe wind and the wind put up or raised dust that was brownish in color, then red, then black, until the people were covered in darkness. And 3 hours of darkness till they thought it was going to end, but still continued until finally it left. And these situations, when you read them, you can't believe that. Right? How the Muslims, they lived through these. And this is one of the many they mention in history. And when we compare this to what we're seeing now, we still see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has much rahmah on us. But we take all these together, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us. وَيَدْفَعْ عَنَّا هَذَا الْبَلَاءَ هَذَا الْوَبَاءَ. We have to ask Allah, and we have to beg Him, but we have to also take the means. And all this is a reminder because at the end of the day, we are human beings, we forget. And I decided just to pick this topic because, again, of the situation and to share these fawaid. And inshallah, with that much, we'll end. If anyone has any questions or something they wish to add or to benefit by us, inshallah, yes. So here it's mentioned, in one of the scholars, he actually recorded himself. So his name, we just mentioned here, Shihabuddin Ahmed bin Yahya. And it's mentioned at the end of Ibn Hajar's book. Right, when the author, Ibn Hajar wrote a book, Badr Ma'un, fi Fadl Ta'un. And in the end of the book, there's these stories about what happened in other time periods. In year 449 Hijri, this sheikh was alive, he wrote it. So if you return back to the book, you get those glimpses. Yes.
Some masajid order people to separate from each other while praying. Is that?
So this is something that's happening now. People are separating one another. As far as I know, we don't have the ulama advising us with this, because the separation of praying in separate places, this is to limit the number. But separating salah, لا تدعوا فرجات للشيطان. I don't know how we're going to pray, and there's gaps between it. and our salawat. So I don't know of anything the ulama advising like this. So we have to stick with what we know. So now people misunderstood what he said. Amr al-As separating, now we're praying in 6 meters apart perhaps. And one here is one there, and how are we going to feel the people in the masjid? So these type of things, wallahu a'lam, I don't know if the mashayikh, they said something like this even. The shaykh knows, but whenever, I didn't hear that, yes. So we mentioned here that some of those masajid, and if it comes from the government, if they say to close it, then that's different. But the ulama advise that if it's still open and there is not that rule, then you can still go. But the person who doesn't feel that needs to go. But those who are making the decision, it's upon them, for who they're taking their ruling from and their knowledge from, that they have to be the ones who are in front of Allah in terms of what they're deciding. But we say that what the kibar ulama advising is that when it comes to going to the masajid, as long as it's open, you can attend. This should be established in Jum'ah and the Jama'at. However, if you feel that you're going to contract this illness, then you can stay back. But in terms of what they're ruling, that's upon them, what decision they're taking and where they're taking it from. Yes, brother.
The separation is the group to pray one time and another group to pray one time, or making them start.
So what do they mean is that a group should be, what they intend is that a group prays, for example, in this masjid, 50 people. And they go in another musalla, and other people pray there. Or in some area, so people pray in different places. So in the masjid itself, we can't have 2 groups praying at the same time. Especially when the one jama'ah is happening. But what they're saying is that because you can pray salah anywhere, and same with Jum'ah, everyone goes everywhere. Alhamdulillah, that's easier, but because they're putting some limits on number. So that's what it is. But it's not in the masjid itself, everybody is separated, because that's not also the way we pray. Yes?
The virus is everywhere now.
Yes.
So wherever you go, it's there. So moving from one place to place, does it make a difference?
It does if someone's moving from one place that has no virus. There are some places where there's little to no. A lot of parts of Africa, there's very little virus. So the point is, if someone were to go and they're here, wherever they are now, as you see, we stay where we are. Because at present time, even the governments are not allowing people just to travel. So we see now, people even now here in this country or other country, we should not flee it. So if someone is going to go, is going somewhere for other reasons. Yes.
They are saying this afternoon, for example, they are saying people who leave Canada who live outside should come back. Otherwise, we will be closing. So people are rushing back to.
Yeah, see, those things we have to look into. What is the intent? Why are they kind of come? Because at the end of the day for us, as long as we're here and it's in our city, we just remain till it's finished. And if someone does this with this intention, Allah will reward them. And the only reason they were to leave is for other reasons. For example, they have to go to get something, have a work or something like this. And Allah is the one who's, Wallahu khairu hafidha. Allah is the best of protectors. That's what they have for question point.
I think his initial question was, he was talking about within the city.
Yes.
Different masajids.
Yes.
I think that's
It means praying different masajid.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the thing. If someone now is in an area where he can pray in this masjid or that masjid, everyone prays where they're praying. But if the number is the issue, for example, some jama'at are very big, then they can say, okay, this many people pray here, and more than that, you pray somewhere else. It's not a must to pray. Everyone has to pray in the same masjid, especially if there's this ruling from the government. They're saying this many numbers. If they have a number, then he said the Shaykh, 50 and 100, for example, go here, another 50, 100 over there. But as far as right now, they still open the prayer spaces. So people can still pray. But again, if someone is fearful, they can remain back. And there's no wrong on that. Yes. So you can find that story in Sahih al-Jami' Sahih Targhib of Shaykh al-Albani. So the question, should an employee follow their employer's instruction regarding attending work, especially if it's contingent on pay? This is a question, obviously, it needs to be raised to the person who they're working for, in that some work is still being offered, and there's still people are still working. So the employee should raise the question to the employer that they themselves perhaps are not safe, and the employee should also take a look at the situation of people and make a ruling that's safe for the people. Because as far as we know that, the government hasn't banned everyone. Certain places now, I believe the government is now working or have taken to work at home and other places. So if they're taking these precautions, it's advisable for both the employee and the employer to discuss this and to make a decision that is best for them, because safety is first. But it's different in a situation for perhaps that they say everyone cannot work, then everyone has to work. Not. But in this case, I would advise that you go towards them and make a case to them about the safety of themselves and also the safety of the Muslims in the community over work. And again, whatever is easy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us, because a lot of people are still working, and may Allah make it easy, the situation. Yes?
You mentioned that the illnesses happen because of the people's sins, and society to make tawbah.
So we say in this situation, tawbah is necessary for us to be relieved of this problem, but it also shows generally tawbah is always obligatory. But in this case, we say more so, because if it's coming from our sins, this is the way to come back. So we say someone should know that general ruling is tawbah is always necessary, always wajib. وَمَنْ لَمْ يَتُبْ فَأُولَٰئِكَ الظَّالِمُونَ means that every time you make a mistake, you should be hoping to repent anyways. But when we see these calamities, we should be very conscious. What are we doing wrong? How are we living? Because whatever happens at the end of the day, Allah is watching us. So this is so important. This is the chance for us to make amends, especially now when we see we're so close to Ramadan as well. So we need to be very cautious. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us all. Yes.
Commanding the good forbidding the evil a means right now to uplift his tribe.
It is, because we said, Hafiz ibn Hajar mentions that from the reasons why people will be afflicted by this sickness, or why the people will even pass in it, is because they left off commanding the good and forbidding evil. So in these times, dua, remind dhikrullah, salah, dua, all these things are means. Commanding the good, forbidding the evil, sharing fawaid, benefits, all of it is. So even that from the benefit of why we need to, in these times, ulama say from the adab of these times, increase in ibadah. Because when you do that, Allah will allow us more to be saved. So yes, we have to still command one another with good, prohibit the evil, especially now when people's hearts are more open because they're seeing the things in front of them and they're realizing their own selves. Inshallah, we'll end with this much. Subhanaka bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.